Hi, everyone. Welcome to Backstage Classical Conversations. I'm your host, Katrina Stroud, and I'm a classical violinist pursuing my master's in music at the University of Michigan. In this series, I invite esteemed classical musicians onto the show and interview them to tell their stories and give advice to share with others and preserve their legacies. Today, I'm joined by violinist Jesse Mills, or the Horszowski Trio, who I had the pleasure of working with during his trio's residency at the University of Michigan this last year. I learned so much from my coachings and from watching their recital where they played an incredible Ravel piano trio. For those of you who don't know him, Jesse Mills is a two-time Grammy nominee and enjoys performing music of many genres as well as music of his own invention. Mills is a co-founder of the Horszowski Trio and Duo Prism, which earned first prize at the Salieri Zanetti International Competition. With Rieko Aizawa, Mills became co-artistic director of the Alpenglow Chamber Music Festival in Colorado in 2010. The Horszowski Trio has become a vital force in the international chamber music world since their formation in 2011. In 2019, they made their sold-out London debut at Wigmore Hall, followed by a successful 21-concert tour of Germany. In 2023, the Horszowski Trio Prize was created by the prestigious Fischoff National Chamber Music Competition to encourage the next generation. As a member of the Flux Quartet, Mills performed music composed during the last 50 years, in addition to frequent world premieres. As a composer and arranger, Mills has been commissioned by prestigious venues and has continued his work as an improviser, releasing a recording of original compositions to critical acclaim. Jesse Mills graduated with a Bachelor of Music degree from the Juilliard School, where he studied with Dorothy DeLay, Robert Mann, Itzhak Perlman, and Naoko Tanaka. Mr. Mills is on the faculty at the Bard College and Brooklyn College. Thank you so much for joining me today on my podcast. I'm so honored to have you here. So what was your musical background like, and when did you start playing the violin?
All right. Well, I started at the age of 3. My parents are not musicians, but they're both real music lovers. My mom grew up singing, in church in Wisconsin as a kid, and then I think she always wanted to play violin, but didn't have the opportunity. So as soon as I was born, she sort of started me on that path for both of us.
Yeah.
My father, not a musician either. He's a scientist, but they're both really inquisitive people about music. So they kind of encouraged me strongly. But from the very beginning, I grew up in Englewood, New Jersey, which is not far from where I live now in Manhattan. I've kind of been on this path with music and in my life since then. I guess it's been 45 years or so.
Yeah. And who were some of your musical mentors when you were growing up?
Growing up, I had the opportunity to work with some teachers and it was great. But I think the main education that I got was from being a concert goer. My parents took me to see chamber music concerts at this concert series, which was actually on a boat. Maybe you might have heard of it. It's called Barge Music in Brooklyn, right in the Fulton Ferry landing there, right underneath the Brooklyn Bridge. And going back to when I was very young, maybe 4 or 5, they would take me to these concerts almost every week. And we would actually get the recordings of what they were going to be playing. I think my mom basically wanted to, build my attention span a little bit and give me something to do. So she wanted to give me as much of a chance to be able to sit still as possible. So we went to the library that week and sort of got the records out of the music that was going to be performed, and then study it a little bit. So it wasn't the first time I was hearing it. So it's a lot of dedication from her. And but then, I got to know the artists. A lot of the people that were, performing there were frequent, repeat performers. So there was a cellist there named Fred Sherry, who was also, I think at that time, the director of the Chamber Music Society of Lincoln Center as well.
Okay.
And there were some of his colleagues that he would invite, and it was a violinist named Equan Bey. And so these were like sort of my superstars growing up. We always used to go talk to them after the concert and introduce ourselves. And after doing that for many weeks, I think, they became kind of friends, but also definitely mentors. Yeah.
Wow, amazing. Yeah, and then you eventually made your way to the Juilliard School. Do you have any stories or lessons to share from that time?
I do have lots of stories. um, yeah, well, I started at Juilliard actually in the pre-college when I was 12. And prior to that, I was taking lessons at another music school in New York called the Third Street Music School Settlement.
Okay.
And then, yeah, when I was 12, it was sort of time for me to move on to the big, Juilliard experience, which I would then continue on with through my undergrad. So when I think of my education, it sort of starts when I was 12, actually. And I
Okay.
started studying with this teacher who was very famous, Dorothy DeLay. Obviously, you know her name. Yeah, she was Itzhak Perlman's teacher and Midori and Sarah Chang and all these people. So
Mhm.
there was a lot of pressure for me and all of my peers to try to like be in Miss DeLay's good graces.
Okay.
She could sort of make or break you, and she did that for a lot of people, mostly make people, and then either just wasn't. I don't think she would like actively tried to blacklist anyone, but still there was this threat. Like if she wasn't happy with you, it was not good. So.
Yeah.
Um, there's a lot of pressure, but I remember she would start her day, I think, before teaching with like a lot of business at home. And, she was sort of pulling strings and making contacts with managers and conductors and trying to sort of set up some of her students with those opportunities. By the time she would start teaching at Juilliard, it was like the afternoon, sometimes the late afternoon. So she would show up and then she would start teaching then, and she had a lot of students. So sometimes my lessons were like 12 midnight, 1 a.m.
Wow.
And just, I remember just being there. A lot of her other students were sort of lingering around the door, waiting for their turn and warming up. And sort of this real scene that it's an unmistakable feeling. You walk out of the elevator and it's like, okay, you're about to be in this very stressful kind of high pressure situation. So
Mm.
definitely remember that. And I definitely remember, actually Miss DeLay would often drive me home at the end of the night because my parents' house in New Jersey was on the way back to where she lived in Nyack, New York. So
Okay.
we were sometimes spending some time in the car together, just the two of us, and she was driving. I remember this one story where she said, "Oh yeah, Jesse, look, I see a violin case that person's walking on the street. Who is that? Is that one of ours?" And it basically, she had so many students that sometimes it wasn't clear if she knew everyone really that well. And so, but she was definitely aware of like all the violinists out there, and she really wanted to be actively sort of involved. And I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, an amazing privilege to get to work with her, I'm sure, as well.
Yeah.
And so after graduating college, what were some of your career goals as a young musician? And what did those first few years look like after graduating?
So after graduate, I should say that after halfway through my undergrad, I switched to the studio of Robert Mann, who was the first violinist of the Juilliard String Quartet. So that was also another integral part of my musical education. But I sort of gravitated towards chamber music. I think it really kind of went all the way back to being a concert goer as a kid, seeing those chamber music concerts at the Barge. But then maybe sort of that was the formative years. But then also halfway through, I sort of made this choice to pursue a career in chamber music. And it's hard to know exactly when that happened, but I definitely wanted that for myself. I like the music. I like the people. I like the shared experience with colleagues and things like
Mhm.
that.
Yeah.
So I think at one point I kind of decided that's what I wanted to do primarily. Of course, I was up for just about anything that would come my way.
Mhm.
And there was also another part of my, musical interest, which was non-classical music. And so actually at a certain point, I had thought maybe I was set for a career more as an improviser. And
Mm.
I had a band and we were very serious about it. So it sort of started off with chamber music, then went to this sort of non-classical thing, which I still do a little bit, but then eventually sort of came back to chamber music and met my wife, who was a pianist, and we wanted to play together and that stuff. But
Yeah.
I'll just say, right out of school, I joined a string quartet, which was called the Flux Quartet, which was
Mhm.
a kind of primarily they're still in existence with, I'm not in it anymore, but they're really a new music string quartet. So they
Mm.
kind of pride themselves on playing music of just very, very fresh music, like of the last 50 years.
Mhm.
So I did that for a while and actually really enjoyed that as well. That's sort of a different little path that I was on for a bit, and then sort of onto my own band, and then to the more classical realm that I find myself in now.
Yeah. And then you eventually started the Horszowski Trio. How did that begin, and how did the group choose the name?
Yeah, so my wife to be, actually, we were already married at that point. I think it was 2011 when we started the trio. We started with our first cellist, Raman Ramakrishnan, who I went to school with and I'd known from summer camp, actually going back to when I was 12.
Wow.
And so we were close and we played a lot together. And I was playing a lot with Rieko as a duo, violin piano duo, but we were having, we had a manager and we were getting some concerts, but we weren't able to make a full-time career out of playing violin piano duos, even though we loved it. Partly, I think something about the added dimension of more people, a third person, obviously opens the opportunities up. And I think sometimes presenters would prefer to put duos together from, two famous soloists or something.
Yeah.
And that's totally fine. But we kind of had a different vision of the sonata repertoire where we really thought of it as like almost like a string quartet, but just two people, but like, where you're really sort of beholden to the group sound,
Mhm.
not just two individuals.
Yeah.
And then when we started playing in the trio with Raman, we really enjoyed that and it became successful too. So that was helpful. The way we chose the name was actually difficult because it's hard to pronounce Horszowski and it's
Mhm.
also hard to spell.
Mhm.
But the name actually comes from Rieko. She studied with the great Mieczysław Horszowski, who was a Polish pianist born in 1892. And she studied with him. She was his last student at
Wow.
Curtis Institute. A lot of people knew the name Rubinstein and they knew Horowitz, but a lot of people didn't know Horszowski. He was an incredible artist and incredible person. He was actually playing solo recitals in Carnegie Hall up until almost right before he died. So she studied with him for 4 years. He was 96 when they started working together.
Wow.
And then he almost 101 when he passed away, but very, very active up until the very end. He was incredible. So anyway, we wanted to celebrate his legacy, and
Mhm.
also we wanted to celebrate her connection and those incredible years that she studied with him. So we decided to call ourselves the Horszowski Trio. Even though that wasn't sort of the first thing that came to mind, it became clear that this is what we should call ourselves because, we really believed in that story of the truth of, her education. And also she's still in touch with Mr. Horszowski's widow.
Okay.
And so we got the blessing of Biche Horszowski, of course, before we named the trio. But
Yeah.
it's been great, actually. And despite the difficulty in spelling, and especially for those who don't know him, it's something that we can celebrate and we could talk about. And it actually ends up being something that people remember, actually, because of the unique story.
Mhm. Yeah, and did the trio ever play for him? Did he know about you guys before he passed?
Unfortunately, no, because we started the trio after he passed away, unfortunately. So I never met him either personally, but yeah, my experience in, learning about him actually came from when I was a student at Marlborough Music Festival, and his wife Biche, who I just mentioned, actually would come there and play videos of his recitals and sort of promote him to the current participants of Marlborough Music Festival. And that was even before I met Rieko. So that was like maybe 2000, 2001. So that's how I heard about Mr. Horszowski. And then when I met Rieko and she was telling all the stories, I, would do a little research, and there's a lot of videos on YouTube that you can listen to, and just really incredible playing. So yeah, unfortunately, never got to meet him personally, but he was an incredible guy, very humble. And we sort of, as a trio, like to celebrate the ethos that he exuded, which is just this kind of like all about the music, sincere music making, and warmth of soul,
Yeah.
which you can hear in his sound, but you can also hear in the stories about him.
Yeah, I love that. So the fish off competition now has the Horszowski Prize. How did this begin, and how is the trio involved when someone wins this prize?
Yeah, so we've been involved with the fish off competition as judges individually, and I think Rieko is the first person from our trio to be involved at Fish Off. And then I also have been a judge there. And we were talking with them, and they came up with this idea of why don't we start a Horszowski Trio Prize, which will celebrate specifically the piano ensemble that wins the highest ranking piano ensemble in a given year. So every year there'll be a Horszowski Trio, both in the junior division and in the senior division.
Okay.
And we decided, that we could offer the prize as, as an award for the winner, but also we could work with the groups. So there'll be one group from either the junior or the senior division that comes every year to a festival where our trio's been participating as faculty for many years. It's the Mimir Chamber Music Festival,
Okay.
MIMIR, and that's in Fort Worth, Texas. So we
Okay.
go there every year. We play concerts, we coach, and then since we started the Horszowski Trio Award with Fish Off, we have an opportunity to really spend a lot of time with that ensemble and get to know them, and then we've also been able to keep in touch with these ensembles over the years after having those experiences together. So it's been really great, and some really excellent groups. So that's something that we are continuing in perpetuity.
Yeah. And so speaking of mentorship, we met when you're doing the residency at the University of Michigan and you're doing this
Right.
mentorship with the Fish Hop groups. So, what do you find most meaningful about these mentorships, and what do you hope groups get out of your coachings?
Well, first of all, I really enjoyed working with you, Katrina.
You. You do.
That's what it's all about for us, is just to be able to. I mean, it helps when somebody like yourself is at a very high level, and then we can really kind of get into the finer points, and that's really what it's all about. But I guess overall, in a more general sense, mentorship is important to us. I mean, just because we were in your shoes or in younger people's shoes before we were where we are now, and we
Mhm.
wouldn't be where we are now if it weren't for our teachers and people. I mentioned earlier the cellist Fred Sherry. When I was a kid, used to see him, and then he's somebody who I feel was one of my biggest mentors. Also as a person, and sort of I've modeled a lot of my. I actually think I've modeled even things in my personality after him, just because
Mhm.
you start to look up to people, and it really helps to meet and interact with musicians who you respect. It really helps you kind of form who you are and how you approach music.
Mhm.
So we take this really seriously now that we're on this side of it. And I feel that's kind of like a mission that we've developed, because a career is short, really, if you think about it. If
Yeah.
after you're unable to play, if you're lucky enough, you have the opportunity to teach and you have the opportunity to continue to pass on the art form, which is in need of good stewards. I think music is a very kind of human thing, and it's really all about the people.
Mhm.
So, like, that's sort of why we call ourselves the Horszowski Trio, because Rieko had that kind of mentorship from him, and so it's just like a continuum. We hope that we can continue to do that, and that we can hopefully have a positive effect on people from the next generation. And you never know, like, what's going to happen in the world beyond music. And this is at least one thing that we can do, that we feel like we're doing something positive.
Yeah, for sure. I love that. Thank you for sharing.
Mm.
And so you're also been talking a lot about your wife Rieko and how you play together very often. How do the two of you balance your musical and your personal life together?
Oh, that's a loaded question. No, it's actually it's been inseparable. Our relationship and our music making has been combined from the beginning. When I first met Rieko, we were both, young professionals freelancing. She used to live in Philadelphia, but she did a lot of work in New York City, and I live in New York City, always have. And so we ended up playing in a group together. It was a sort of a rotating cast of musicians, and we were two of them. And so we would play fairly frequently in this group. It was a group called New York Philmusica. I'm not sure if it still exists. But I remember when I first met her, I remember we were playing Mendelssohn D minor piano trio together with another cellist who is a friend now still. And I remember just something about the way that she made music was different than the way I would necessarily do it in terms of the timing and the colors that she was creating. And I was really taken with her playing, and also just the space in between the notes, that kind of.
Hmm.
She had a lot of commitment, and she had a real serious care for every note and the music making, and it was
Hmm.
really very inspiring. So I think that is when I first met her, that was through music. And then we obviously, got to know each other beyond that and eventually married. But we always knew we wanted to play music because it's sort of where it all started. And being in a group, as you probably know, is like, it's not always easy. It's not always like perfect. There's some
Hmm.
things that disagreements or things that you have to negotiate and work out and compromise. And we've always been able to do that without hating each other,
That's
which
good.
is which is rare, I think, because sometimes I think if you fully respect somebody, then you can do that. But if there's like ever some sliver of doubt about like not thinking that this person is as good as you are, then it's hard.
Yeah.
And in our case, we feel the former, like we really feel a full respect for each other. We still have disagreements, don't get me wrong, but it's healthy, it's a good amount. And so I don't know if we talked about it, formally, or if it just sort of happened that we chose this life together, with our careers this way, but
Mhm.
certainly at a certain point we did talk about it and made that choice. We don't have children because we want to keep playing music around the clock and,
Mhm.
giving it our all. And so we kind of had to make that choice. Yeah. So, but we're happy. It's a good life.
Yeah, that's great. That's so inspiring. I love that. And so you talked about being an improvisational artist a little bit, and you're also a composer. When did you begin both of those different avenues of music?
So, starting with the improvisation, I think I was maybe 12 or 13 when I, through friends who were into improvisation and playing other instruments, like I had a really good friend in high school named Martin, and he was a composer himself, but also an electric bass player and pianist, and we played some jazz together. And then we started really getting into that. So I would like sneak out of my house, and then we would go into New York and go to jazz clubs together, and we kind of fell in love with that music together. And he was very advanced and a great musician, so I learned a lot from him. Spent a lot of nights like at his house, just we were improvising a lot together. And I didn't realize how much that was helpful, actually, just for me as a violinist too, because I didn't really like violin in jazz and rock music so much. I liked
Mm.
the music. I liked listening to a lot of records of like non-violinists like Charlie Parker, and Miles Davis, and the electric bass player Jaco Pastorius, John Coltrane, all these people. I really, really like thought this was it. This is they're the best musicians in the world. And in trying to sound like a sincere like alto saxophone player myself on the violin, I was trying to sort of undo a lot of the classical inflections that I had been working on so much, since I was a kid as a violinist.
Mhm.
But in trying to do that, I think I got more comfortable on the instrument because you start to think about the notes you're playing, not so much how to do it, but you just like, okay, I have to think B flat and I have to play B flat. Just it
Mm.
has to be very quick and intuitive. And so that was something that I think really helped me actually, even though I'm primarily a classical violinist to this day, I think that really made me more comfortable with the instrument, like just no separation between the instrument and my thoughts, just that kind of thing. So at one point, as I mentioned, I had this band when I was in my early 20s, and we were all writing music for the band. The band was called Nurse Kaya, which was named after the bass player Tim Kaya. The instrumentation was string quartet plus bass and drums, and everybody was writing music for that group, and there was a lot of improvisation in a lot of the pieces, but also we were composing in various styles. And so I started trying things out as a composer and enjoying that, and also just enjoying making music in a different way from Miss DeLay and Juilliard and stuff. And I really thought I was going to do that professionally, but things, as often everything has a lifespan, and people moved out of town and went in different directions. And so I sort of stopped with that and could never really find the people to play with after that who I felt as close with as I did in that group. And at the same time, things were really coming along with the classical stuff. So it's just sort of shifted back to this, and I'm happy doing this. But I do like to compose to this day. I've written pieces for the trio, and I've also written pieces for other people. I feel like also, you probably feel this too, that, if you do music, there's so many different things that we're required to do. Like you've got the classical music that you're working on in school and with your teacher, and then you've got music that you're reading, hopefully with friends, and just like playing for fun.
Mm-hmm.
And especially today in 2026, you kind of have to be a jack of all trades in order to be a musician, right?
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah. So I think that I have a lot of experience writing music. I have a lot of experience playing a lot of new music written by other people. And so in a way that is great because you're exposed to all these different things and they all inform each other. But sometimes as a composer, I found it a little bit difficult to have my own voice because like we're trained to sort of play the music of other people. And then, so when do you, I don't know, do you compose yourself or?
I don't, but I can imagine, that challenge. And so who are some of the inspirations for your own compositions, and how would you describe your compositional style?
So it's hard for me to describe my compositional style. I definitely feel like the music that I like to listen to both for fun and the music that I enjoy working on in my performing, traditional music and new music by other people, definitely informs me as a composer. Sometimes I feel a little bit like a chameleon, like you have to be a chameleon. You have to play everything exactly as it's written on the page with respect, to the composer. But at the same time, when you're a composer, you're making up the notes, you're making up your own melodies. And so sometimes I find it hard to shift back and forth. But anyway, I think what I enjoy, what inspires me to compose is usually thinking about things besides music. So if I try to sort of make my music refer to some kind of feeling or experience that I have in life, or if I'm inspired by a work of visual art or something that I see in nature, I find that it comes easier. The ideas about what the music should sound like comes more easily. But if I start thinking as a composer, like, oh, I have to write something that has these qualities that I really like in this other person's music, and then I end up trying to imitate them, then that gets a little dangerous. I actually had a piece last year that I wrote together with Rieko, believe it or not. We actually composed a piece together, which is an interesting project. But it was the Guggenheim Museum here in New York. I know somebody there, and they asked us to write a piece that was a response to a work of visual art there. And so we did that, and that was a great opportunity. The artist was named Mike Kelly, who is a really great improviser and also a visual artist, and he worked a lot with textiles in the 1980s. And he's based in Detroit, actually, not far from the University of Michigan. In fact, I think he went to the University of Michigan himself, and he played saxophone. But he was a great visual artist, and he has some works at the Guggenheim Museum here in New York. And so we wrote a piece that was a response to this art installation that he has there. And that was a really great project, very interesting, and a lot to negotiate, like how to respond faithfully to the work of art, because we didn't want to just do whatever we wanted. We wanted to sort of really kind of try to think about what the work that he made was, and like what qualities did it have, and how would that inform us as composers. And then to work together on a composition was it's rare to do that. I know that
Yeah.
the FAE Sonata, have you played that?
I haven't.
It's
Mm-mm.
Schumann, Brahms, and their other colleague named Dietrich. They
Hmm.
co-wrote a sonata together.
Oh,
So like some of the movements are by Robert Schumann, some of them are by Brahms, and some are by Dietrich. And so it's
hmm,
called the FAE Sonata. Obviously, 19th century, like really romantic and everything, but
hmm.
that's the only other piece I know of in a classical context, co-composed by different people. But
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's super cool. And I love it when visual art and classical music kind of come together and all the different things you can do with those. So I'll check that out.
yeah,
What do you think the importance of new music is, and how do you balance contemporary and classical music in your own performances today?
I always like to think that all music was contemporary music once. Even the oldest music was written in a moment when it was the only thing going on, that was the contemporary time. So we try to approach all music with the same freshness as we do as if we're playing something that's written for us today. And we've had the opportunity to do that, play some works that were written for us and had an exchange with the composer, a lot of back and forth and sort of opportunity to exchange ideas. And that's really been wonderful. When we're playing old music like Beethoven and Brahms or Bach or whatever, we like to try to think of it in a context as if it were like the first time that it was being played. Actually, I remember one of my teachers, Robert Mann, when he was in the Juilliard String Quartet, they were approached by the Juilliard School, and this is as they were starting the quartet. And the way that they got their residency, I think he had a conversation with the president at Juilliard, and he said, "We're going to approach contemporary music like it's old music, and we're going to play old music like it's contemporary music." And I think that's a really cool way of going about one's, performing. Anyway, but I do think that I really love, writing music myself, but I also really love working with composers on new works. And our trios had an opportunity to do that. And there's a great composer named John Harbison who we've played, his music. He's written a couple of piano trios, two, I believe. And the second trio, Short Stories, is something we've been playing. And once we played for him, and what I loved about it is that he said to us, "What I love about your performance of my piece is that you sort of made it yours. Like you're not trying to just do what I wrote, but you're trying to find your own voice with it as well." And of course, we want to first and foremost honor the voice of the composer and keep searching more and more to see that we are seeing through the piece as conceived by the composer. But I think also we're able to do that best when we're also able to have fun with it and with our own voices in combination.
Mm.
So this is something we always try to do with new music. And
Yeah.
I think that's the best way to make music in general. It's a labor of love. Try to find your own voice. Try to sing the music as if you wrote it. It's like the most beautiful thing.
Yeah, no, I love that. And so I'm sure there's like not as many piano trios as there are for some other groups of ensembles. And I'm sure you have to play pieces multiple times, like again and again. So how do you keep things you've played multiple times fresh and sounding new?
That's a really good question. I think that certain pieces, there's no problem doing that because just the music is complex and there's so many, you keep finding new things in it all the time. And that's true for a lot of the music that we end up playing is
Mm.
we like pieces like that, where there's just, there's not only one way you can do it. Even if we're playing Haydn wrote this piece, but like you can phrase it one way or another way and it'll still be great. And that's true with a lot of great music is like there's different ways of doing things, or you might realize later coming back to it, oh, you know what, actually I'm inspired by this section a little differently than I used to be. And I'm enjoying, let's say, like we're playing this piece right now by the great composer Rebecca Clark. So she wrote very few works, but there's a great piano trio, and we've played it a lot, I mean, over the years. But for some reason, every time I come back to it, I have new ways I want to do it. And I think that's because it's a great piece. But also, we're just trying to keep our ears open as we play. And I feel like you're trying to think through what you want to do and you try to come up with an interpretation of the music. But if your ears are open when you're playing and performing and rehearsing, sometimes things happen that are fresh and new, like by accident, and then
Hmm.
I think that's how new ideas form, because you're just kind of listening to the music in the moment, and and inevitably you'll hear things differently. By the way, I was thinking about we're talking about visual artworks and music, and I was thinking about the difference between those two media,
Yeah.
where the visual work you keep coming back to look at a painting over and over and over,
Right.
and you can do that because it's there, and you can
Mhm.
come back into the room and see it again and again. But the music, usually it's in performance, it's like once, you just play it and
Right.
and that moment in time is gone.
Hmm.
But I think that as musicians, what we have the advantage of, it's almost like a work of visual art in that we're rehearsing it. So we're playing it a lot over and over to ourselves and rehearsing with our colleagues. And so it's that time in the rehearsal where the music lives.
Yeah.
So in a way, it's a celebration of this moment in time, but it's also like the process is really important.
Yeah. No, I love that analogy. That's great. So, this has been such a great interview. Thank you so much for coming on. And I always like to end with this one question. What advice do you have for aspiring professional musicians?
Oh, well, first of all, I've really enjoyed talking with you too. I think that somebody once told me, in terms of like how to be a violinist or how to go about making that your career, in to really take every opportunity that comes along and treat it with interest, because you might end up liking something you didn't realize that you would. And so I think that has been really helpful, because I've ended up doing things that maybe I wouldn't have done if I didn't have that attitude. And then I ended up meeting new people or being exposed to new works that I loved, and you know just getting better, and also having more opportunities as a result. So that's one piece of advice. The other piece of advice that I always would say is, and I'm trying to live this myself, is like to be humble, because everybody is vulnerable, and we all have that in common, even though some people pretend like they don't have vulnerability.
Mm.
Because our society honors strength, right? The more confident you are, usually the more successful you become. But the true power is through humility, because you're kind of letting people realize that you're just like them, and that's very powerful, because everybody is at their core like that, is nervous or worried about this and that. And if we can admit that we're not perfect, then it makes us more relatable. And sometimes deeper connections and more good things come from showing vulnerability. So I'm trying that. Oh, it's sort of my natural personality, but I always try to sort of pass on that ethos to my students, and just we should all be real. We should all be who we really are, and not try to put on airs.
Yeah. No, I love that advice. Thank you so much for sharing and for coming on today.
Thanks, Katrina. Nice to talk with you.
Thank you so much to Jesse Mills for such a great interview talking about his career of chamber music and mentorship. I loved how honest he was about not being sure if he wanted to do classical music when he was younger, and how he found his way to where he is now. Thank you so much for joining me on Backstage Classical Conversations. If you like this interview, please rate, review, and subscribe to this podcast on the platform you're using. You can follow us at Backstage Classical Podcast on Instagram, or visit the website at backstageclassicalpodcast.com for more episodes and information. I'm Katrina Stroud, and it was great to see you here. Until next time, stay inspired and listen to the stories of others.